Well, this week's decision by Penny Wong and the Labor Party to walk back the previous government's recognition of West Jerusalem as Israel's capital caught many off guard. But the reality is a decision like this is perfectly in keeping with the modern left's view towards Israel and the Jewish people more broadly. We've said on numerous occasions on Outsiders, Labor is no friend to the Jews. Wong has defended the decision in part by saying Morrison only recognised West Jerusalem in the first place to curry favour in electorates like Wentworth. How cynical and patronising can you get to think that Jews must vote as a collective and can be easily bought off? Joining us now to discuss this is Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Michael Rubin. Michael, great to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good to have you here in the studio with us. So let's kick off with the decision around the embassy. This idea of West Jerusalem. How has this been received in Israel, who presumably thought Australia were good allies, good friends?
Well, I think it's the same in Israel as actually in the United States. No one can understand why Australia would so willingly hemorrhage its moral credibility, its moral clarity for essentially nothing. What Australia did was align itself with Iran, Syria, Hamas, ignored the last 10 years of the peace process and all the progress which has been made, and gave sustenance to Mahmoud Abbas, the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, in the 17th year of his 4-year presidential term. And you got a situation where what the anti-peace camp thinks is now they can question any right to Jews in Jerusalem, even though West Jerusalem's within the 1949 lines, not disputed.
But, Michael, I mean, it's amazing to me that within hours of this decision coming down, Hamas put up on their website a statement saying, this is great, good on you, Australia. Palestinian Islamic Jihad put out a statement saying, this is a great step forward for world peace. Now, I mean, I don't know what sort of world you're living in there, but this is clearly a case that Labor has listened to the loony left elements within its own party and sided with terrorists, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. Having Palestine Islamic Jihad talk about world peace is like having Iran talk about women's rights. But from an American perspective, living in Washington, what I don't understand is why Australia would give this gift to Vladimir Putin. This came less than a week after Mahmoud Abbas gave a full-throated endorsement to Vladimir Putin. But what I worry about is that perhaps within Labor, there's this belief that maybe they can go ahead and recognize the entire state of Palestine unilaterally. You know, that would follow Vladimir Putin's model of recognizing Donetsk and Luhansk. It sets a very dangerous precedent. Labor may think this is about Jerusalem, but in the rest of the world, we're seeing Australia pivot away from responsibility, from moral clarity, to become a real wild card, irresponsible.
And do you think that's going to be reflected in the UN? Are you expecting Australia to vote differently than it has in previous years, perhaps abstaining from votes that it would otherwise vote with Israel?
I think they absolutely will, Rita. You know, in Washington, we always looked at Australia and Canada both as really pillars of moral clarity, which were able to leverage quiet diplomacy in the way the United States can. Australia can no longer do that. They've lost credibility. And the question for me as a policy analyst is why? What did they get? How did they advance the peace process? In fact, Albanese set it back.
Well, it's worse than that as well, Michael, because as I'm sure you're aware, Penny Wong, as well as this crazy decision on West Jerusalem, only a couple of weeks ago, she reversed a decision which actually this show was largely instrumental in bringing about with Dr. David Adler and Pauline Hanson and others, which was to slash the funding to UNRWA. So the Australian Foreign Affairs under Julie Bishop, and well done to Julie Bishop, slashed $10 million of Australian taxpayers' money going to UNRWA because of the fear that that money was being used for pay-for-slay programs and this sort of thing. Penny Wong only 3 or 4 weeks ago reversed that and gave the $10 million back to UNRWA. So that is money which Labor knows full well is suspected in America and elsewhere of funding terrorism, yet they were prepared to put that money back.
You know, it's not even just suspected. The Palestinians talk about this quite openly. They use international aid in order to give pension to terrorists who have killed people in prison. It's completely immoral. It encourages more terrorism. Again, Australia seems dead set under this government to lose its moral credibility.
Tell us about Iran, Michael. You're an expert on Iran, and we've seen a lot happening recently with the headscarf riots. There's obviously a lot happening in Iran itself. What's your perspective? Is Iran coming undone, or are we just going to have another false kind of green revolution that doesn't happen because the world doesn't get behind it? Or are we starting to see the end of the theocracy?
Let's put it this way. The theocracy has lost all legitimacy. It's the guys with the guns that matter, however, so who knows whether they're going to triumph. But again, as someone who used to live in Iran, who was in Iran during the 1999 uprising, what I don't understand is labor talks about helping workers the world over. What the Iranians are now asking for is strike funds. Why is labor willing to help international workers in every place in the world, except in Iran, where they're begging for assistance right now? If you want the Iranian government to stop killing the people, stop pumping money to them, let the workers continue their strike in the oil field, that means you've got to support the workers. Where's labor on this?
Rita?
Well, it's depressing because they do seem to be abandoned by our government, the US government, and by the feminist movement, because this was an uprising that started with the killing of a young woman who wasn't wearing her hijab properly. And the Iranian women, after more than 40 years of Islamist tyranny, want to reclaim their rights, and they are being killed. Hundreds have been killed already, and possibly many more will be killed. Do you think they will suppress this uprising like they have with others with bullets, or is this one so widespread across the country that it has a chance of succeeding?
Well, it has a chance of succeeding. As Azar Nafisi, the writer, had written, women across the world are fighting for rights they've never had. In Iran, and thanks to the Biden administration, in Afghanistan now as well, women are fighting for rights that were actively taken away from them.
Exactly.
What the Iranian regime is trying to do is simply outlast the attention span of the West. That's the danger we've got to keep the focus on right now.
So, Michael, the two issues, Palestine, Iran, they're connected by the same sort of thought. The left seems to have a real blind spot when it comes to these authoritarian, theocratic regimes that don't like gays, don't like women, don't like all the minority groups that they would normally love in the West. Why does the left have such a blind spot? We don't hear Joe Biden talking about Iran. We don't hear the left talking about Iran. And, of course, they all love the Palestinian Authority and all of that. Why is there this blind spot? Is it just that they're anti-Western?
It's self-hatred and self-loathing of everything Western. You know, I came from a Quaker school background, from a hard left background, and I didn't fully appreciate what we had in the United States or what you have in Australia till I lived in the Islamic Republic of Iran and saw how desperate people there were for the basic freedoms we take for granted. We shouldn't lose sight of that for some silly virtue signaling.
Now, Michael, you're out here in Australia, courtesy of Ajax.
Yes.
They brought you out and you're doing various speaks. Tell us where people can see you, anything coming up where they can...
Well, I've been in Perth, Melbourne, Adelaide already. I'll be giving some speaking engagements in Sydney tomorrow before going on to Canberra, but unfortunately, work's going to bring me to Taiwan next, and so my time in Australia is limited, although my wife, who's actually a Russia-Ukraine analyst, will be coming next month.
Fantastic.
Get her on the show.
Catch up with her. That'll be fantastic. Michael Rubin, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders today. Enjoy the rest of the time in Australia, and thank you to Ajax for bringing you onto the show.
Thank you so much.
Today.